Breaking the Cycle, Surviving Hell. By Christopher Breen. Staff writer. Warning: this article contains vulgar language and graphical violence. They looked like the perfect young family, a husband and wife with a son and a daughter, but behind the mirage, her life was full of fear and violence. In 1983, she was a young waitress of 19 and he was an attractive young man with the Canadian Armed Forces, and she found herself attracted to him from the beginning. He was European. He was fit. He was young, charming, and funny, she said. But he was also deeply troubled. Looking back, she didn't see him the way she does now. What she saw was a young military man who had wanted to be a national soccer player, but his parents wouldn't allow him to go to practice. She didn't see the emotional, psychological, and physical abuser he was underneath. I honestly think that before he was in the military he was always a troubled person, she said. Looking back on the stories, he always sabotaged his ability to succeed. Together for 2 short years, in 1985 they decided to tie the knot. During the first 2 years, she remembers now, how he would whittle away her self-esteem, making her feel she wasn't good enough for anyone else. He told her constantly how he would rather be with someone else and that there were women more beautiful than her. You know, when someone says something like that to you, he's not the right person for you, she said. Although she knows now she should have just told him to go and be with someone else, she didn't. She stayed. The psychological abuse continued. With hope he would change, she married him. Although there was a lot of emotional abuse prior to their marriage, she remembers, she was young and would find herself justifying why the man she loved acted the way he did. I never thought about him as an abuser because you don't think in those terms, she said. I thought about it as a human being, as a person that I loved, that is in trouble and hurting, living with things that happened in their childhood. She had wanted to help him, to make things better. You think you can fill that void up for that person and you can't. When she found out she was pregnant, she thought maybe children would bring peace to their marriage. But, when she had her second child, she realized the abuse was escalating. First, I had a daughter and then I had my son, she said, remembering the birth of her daughter, the trip to the hospital and the labor. He got mad at me in the hospital because it took too long, my labor was taking too long. In the hospital while she was having complications, he was yelling at her about how he would rather be at home. When their son was born, he was sick and had to go to the Toronto Hospital for Sick Children. In his mind the children were her responsibility, not his burden, and everything to do with the children was hers to deal with. Back home, her son threw up, allergic to the formula. Attempting to get things cleaned up and her son another bottle, she was verbally assaulted by her husband. What? You cannot handle it? You cannot handle this, she remembered him yelling at her. How come there's no dinner? She was nervous, she said, constantly trying to be and do better, but it was impossible to please him. The first time he ever became violent, he didn't touch me, he punched holes in the wall. And he pulled the phone line out because I was going to call the police. She remembers the fear she felt, but she didn't understand the danger she was in until long after the relationship was over. It was more psychological, so you're not being hurt physically but you're being hurt with words and then you're frightened. Even though he wasn't hitting her, she remembers how scary it was, how afraid she felt when he pulled out the phone lines, leaving her disconnected from the outside world. He was really charming and he was very charismatic, so most people didn't know. Friends and family were unaware of what was going on behind the curtains in her home, but a few people were aware. His really good friend knew. He was over and saw it. My really good friend knew because I eventually told her. Unless you were in a close relationship and involved deeply in their lives, you didn't know what was going on because you didn't see it. You know, I honestly thought, her voice breaking as she reached for a Kleenex, if I loved him and, once we had our family together, and maybe that's something that I needed inside of me, but... Wiping her eyes, she stopped a moment. I still can't even talk about this shit. Clearing her throat, she continues. I thought that it would change and it never did. That's what I thought, I was naive and didn't know. The abuse continued. Although his abuse wasn't dominantly physical, it was psychological and emotional. The physical abuse was limited to pushing and shoving, throwing up a fist in a threatening manner and punching holes in the walls. Constantly he would threaten to take the children and call her stupid, telling her nobody would want her. Things like that really eat away at your self-esteem and self-worth. That was him. He was threatening and he was violent, but he didn't hit me until after we broke up. The police came to our house one night and the police officer talked to me. She left that night and went to a girlfriend's house and stayed there, but she was eventually drawn back to her husband, and once again the police were back. The same police officer ended up coming back the second time and he said, "You had left. Why did you go back?" The one thing she says she does not understand is that question, "Why did you go back?" because it's always the question people ask. "I went back because I had two small children, no income, and because I loved my husband. I went back because I wanted a family." Nobody gets into these relationships thinking let's break up with two little kids. You get into these relationships because you love the person. She went back for many reasons. She always wonders why people do not ask the abuser questions. "Why don't you ask him, why are you acting like that? Why are you punching holes in the walls? Why are you terrorizing your wife?" she said, listing off a few questions. Those are better questions to ask. The final straw came during a Christmas party when she found out a relative had died but was not able to go back to her hometown. In front of all these people, she said, he yelled, "My wife is so fucking stupid. You know how fucking stupid she is. She doesn't even have enough money to fly home." She remembers the humiliation and heartbreak. "I thought to myself, I have had enough, I am going to leave you. I am not going to be humiliated like this all the time." She didn't leave right away, but, with the help of her friend and her mother, she would finally get away. He stalked her, followed her, sitting outside her window. He would throw stones at it and terrorize her. "After we were broken up, he grabbed my hair and pushed my face into a wall," she said. "My face was all bruised." Her mother told her she feared for her daughter's safety, but she didn't feel unsafe. She finally got a restraining order and he went to jail. "He came right out of jail and came right to my work," she said. "He looked so sad and I always felt bad for him, but he had just breached the restraining order." She didn't call the police, but she knows she should have. "The most dangerous men are the 3% of men who would do just what my husband did. I was probably in one of the most dangerous situations, but I had no idea, I did not have a clue." She didn't understand the gravity of the situation, the danger, until the night she came home and found him inside her house. She walked straight into a noose hanging from the banister in her home. Her husband had written on the walls of her home, "This is done because of my wife." Walking past the noose, she wanted to talk to him, to help him. "You do not want any harm to come to the person, you just want them to stop," she said. "I'm lucky he didn't kill me, knowing what I know now. I would never allow a domestic violence victim to walk into their home and talk to someone that's suicidal. That's a murder-suicide. Obviously that didn't happen, but he was deeply, deeply troubled." She didn't know there were services available. Having the support of her friend who let her and her children stay with them, and her mother, she managed to rebuild her life slowly. Eventually, she stopped being the mediator and had clear boundaries set for her now ex-husband in regards to when he could see the children. Although she doesn't fear him anymore and she is armed with knowledge about keeping herself and her home safe, the effects of the abuse are still there. "I have never remarried," she said. "I'm just too fearful of that, well, maybe not falling back into the same situation, cause I don't think that would happen, but of having an unsuccessful relationship." She laughs a little, whatever that means. She knows she is more reserved now. "Before I met him I was very fun-loving and carefree. I am much more reserved now because of that relationship, it changed me." Life for her is good. Rebuilding her life from scratch, she started with part-time work and part-time schooling, working her way to a university degree. Finding a job she loved was the next step because being a sole supporter was a tough position. The biggest accomplishment was letting go of the shame. "I carried that shame with me for many, many years," she said. Going on social assistance, her children needing support and funding to participate in community activities and sports. "It's just now that I feel that it is not my shame to carry. It is his shame to carry." Continuing to better herself, she plans to return to school and get her master's degree. "I still see in our community there's a lot of violence, domestic violence. So, if I can give back or help someone, then that's what I try to do, but I have a good life now." The words of wisdom she imparts when someone tells her they stay because their abuser loves them is a simple message. "Sometimes love isn't enough," she said. "That word is used, but love is supposed to be unconditional and it's accepting you for who you are. It's not restricting. If a person really loves you and they don't talk to you like you're an asshole, they accept you." She wants people to know plain and simple, you shouldn't be afraid of someone you love or have to worry about what you say or how you speak. Love isn't perfect, but you shouldn't have to change who you are for that love, and you shouldn't be afraid of it.